Okay. Okay. Well, good evening. Hopefully, you can hear me. And we want to welcome everyone who is on our live stream. And again, I hope that everyone combed the back of their hair. And I said that the last time, every single person in the camera view went like this. So, no, we're glad to have you with us tonight. And tonight we're going to continue on with Samuel and Psalms. And we're going to advance our way, though, into Second Samuel. We're going to be looking at Second Samuel chapter 15 and then Psalm 3 after that, which is the psalm which is most directly related to that. But again, we're examining the events in David's life where we see what happened, and then in the Psalms, we see his response. And so as we go through life and we have things happen to us, both good and bad, um, we can see how David responded as an example of how we should respond. And this week's going to be a lot of fun because a lot of this was something that you'll see later in the Bible. And I'll show you those connections as we go along. So um, I have no bad dad joke to begin with. Carolyn, if you have one.
I have a joke.
Okay.
What do you call a French stepfather?
What do you call a French stepfather? I don't know.
Faux pas. Good one.
Faux pas.
Nice.
That's bad.
It's very good.
It would have been better if you said fox pox. So, okay, well, let's pray and then we will dive in. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time we can get together and to look at your word and to see how, Lord, as David went through the various things in his life, that how he responded, Lord, and that it may be a lesson to us as we go through the various issues of life, that we may see how you would have us respond and, Lord, be able to apply that to our lives. And so we ask that you would just lead and guide in this time. It'd be a good time of learning and having fun together. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, we are going to look at 2 Samuel chapter 15, and we're going to read the first 16 verses. And then I will ask you a few questions to make sure that we all know what's going on. So it says, after this, it happened that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. Now Absalom would rise early and stand beside the way to the gate. So it was, whenever anyone who had a lawsuit came to the king for a decision, that Absalom would call to him and say, "What city are you from?" And he would say, "Your servant is from such and such a tribe of Israel." And Absalom would say to him, "Look, your case is good and right, but there's no deputy of the king to hear you." Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were made a judge in the land, and everyone who has any suit or cause could come to me, then I would give him justice." And so it was, whenever anyone came near to bow down to him, he would put out his hand and take and kiss him. In this manner, Absalom acted towards all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. Now it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said to the king, "Please let me go to Hebron and pay the vow which I made to the Lord. For your servant took a vow while I dwelt at Geshur in Syria, saying, 'If the Lord indeed brings me back to Jerusalem, I will serve the Lord.' And the king said to him, 'Go in peace.' So he arose and went to Hebron. Then Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, 'As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom reigns in Hebron.' And Absalom went with 200 men invited from Jerusalem, and they went along innocently and did not know anything. Then Absalom sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor from his city, from Gilo, while he offered sacrifices. And the conspiracy grew strong, for the people with Absalom continually increased in number. And now a messenger came to David, saying, "The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom." So David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, "Arise, let us flee, or we shall not escape from Absalom. Make haste to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring disaster upon us and strike the city with the edge of the sword." And the king's servants said to the king, "We are your servants, ready to do whatever my lord the king commands." Then the king went out with all his household after him. But the king left 10 women, concubines, to keep the house. So that's the story of Absalom rebelling against King David. Now, does anybody know what's happened previous to this and why Absalom is the way he is? What happened between Absalom and David before this? Anyone? Nobody knows? Yes. Absalom killed his brother Amnon, didn't he? Why did he do that? Yes, because Amnon had raped his half-sister Tamar. And Absalom saw that. And did David do anything when he knew about what happened? No. And so Absalom took matters into his own hands, and he invited Amnon over for a party and then had his servants kill him. So then Absalom fled from David and was gone, and David would not invite him to come back. David was not going to let him come back. Finally, the head of the army, Joab, says, "David, you got to forgive the kid." And so David says, "Okay, he can come back." Well, he came back, but he stayed away from the king. David wouldn't invite him back into the royal court. And finally, they kind of halfway made up. And then Absalom was off on his own at this point where we start reading. And so Absalom has a pretty good reason to be mad at his dad, doesn't he? Because his dad didn't act when he should have acted. And when Absalom did what was right, his dad got mad at him, didn't he? And kicked him out and said, "Go away." So, why does all that matter? Because of this. Is this situation with Absalom now rebelling, is that something that's all Absalom's fault, do you think?
No,
No?
no.
Okay, good. Why?
What was the question?
Why is Absalom's rebellion? Is that all Absalom's problem? Is that all his fault?
No.
No.
It's partly David's fault.
Yeah,
They're both like bullheaded.
exactly. They both have a part in that, don't they?
Yeah.
Because David's treatment of Absalom was not good, was it?
No.
It was not right. As a matter of fact, his treatment of Amnon was not good, was it?
Mm-mm.
So I want to get back to David because David is at the root of this, actually. And David has a lot to answer for here. There were 2 commandments for the kings, actually 3, but the main 2 that God said, as a king, you should not do this and this. What were those 2 things? Does anybody know? He said, don't have a lot of horses. Number 1. Number 2 is don't take a lot of wives. Okay? He said, don't have a lot of wives. And why did God say that? Why would God say, hey, as king, don't be king, just control yourself. Just have one wife. Don't take a bunch of them.
Because women, different.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not even going to go there and agree with you. But yeah, yeah.
Difficult.
Well, actually, it was because if you marry a lot of women, and especially foreign women, what was the temptation that they would lead the king into? Yeah, idol worship, into idolatry. But also, it was letting that, um, for a man, it's like letting him loose in the candy store as the king. You can have whatever you want, you can do whatever you want. Well, whenever anyone has an appetite that is uncontrolled, does that appetite grow less or more?
More.
Yeah. So, what would David do to produce Absalom? Or actually, I shouldn't say that, one of his brothers. What did David do with Bathsheba? Is what I'm asking. Yeah, he committed adultery. Why? Because his sexual desire was not controlled at all. And as a king, you could get away with that, couldn't you? So God says, just like he says for us, hey, it's a man and a woman, it's 1-to-1. That's the best situation you can possibly have. He said for the king, don't have a lot of wives. The other reason is this: with a lot of wives, you get a lot of children by different mothers, don't you? And so, what are they going to do when they get older? What are they going to want? Yeah, they're going to fight to become the king. And so, with that, this is a natural way of keeping the kids from fighting each other, because David has all these different wives, he has all these different sons. And so, which one's going to get the throne? So, there's a lot of different reasons God does that, but one of them was this exact thing. And what if one wife is favored over the other? Who's going to get the justice in the family?
The favorite.
Yeah, the favorite one, and their kids. So with that, David has that, he does it. He goes ahead and does it. He takes lots of wives. And so now he has these kids, and what are the kids doing? They're up to no good. And so Amnon is the son of one wife, Absalom is the son of another. They're stepbrothers. And then they have a stepsister involved in it as well. And so with that, do you see all the confusion and the chaos that comes from not obeying the Lord? So both David and Solomon broke everything that God said for the kings, because they would take lots of wives, they would have lots of horses, and they would be rich. And so with that, yes.
The horses part? What's
Yeah.
the reason behind the horses?
Because Egypt was big into horses.
Oh.
And actually, they would then end up, because they're trading with them, you know what they would do? They would end up intermarrying with them. And that's exactly what Solomon did, didn't he? And so with that, it was one of those things of don't get entangled with them, because otherwise it will bring you down. So David does that, and he has these kids that are creating chaos. And then he does what's even worse, is he does not discipline his children. When he hears about this rape, what should he have done by the law? What should have happened? Yes, Amnon should have been executed for doing that. But instead, what?
But how can he do that when he was, the same sin? So.
This is where sin weakens your moral character. This is where sin keeps you from obeying the law in the future, because you realize, I've done that. So I'm not going to be hard on them, because otherwise I'd have to be hard on me. And so you want to see that, just look at our culture. We have no moral will anymore, do we?
No.
And it's because we've got so much sin involved. But so Absalom took matters in his own hands, got exiled. He comes back, and he's still mad at dad. Does that excuse Absalom? No, it doesn't. But I want us to understand that this problem is partly David's. Because what we're going to look at tonight is this. Sometimes we sin and create our own problems, but yet does God throw us away? No. David will turn to God in this problem and God will save him. And so we're going to see something even neater than that at the end when we conclude. But so he does that. And does anybody know what Absalom was suffering from as far as his sin goes? Hint, hint, think recent sermon. Yes, envy. Thank you very much. Envy. Because what does he do to David? He goes there and he sits outside the gate, which the gate is where the king or the king's deputy would typically sit and make judgments. So he sits before they can get there and says, oh, if it were me, I'd hear your case and I'd give you justice. And so he just totally undercuts David. And so he steals the hearts of Israel. Again, it comes down to, who do you love? Do you love me or not? Oh, poor me. So Absalom does that to David. And so Absalom has a very severe case of envy. And that's what brings him to do this. One quick note, verse 7, it says, now it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said to the king. Most translators, most commentators believe that that's actually 4 years. That would be really difficult because Absalom was born after David was king, and David reigned about 40 years. So this would have to be after that. This would be after David became king. So it looks like there was a scribal error where instead of 4, they put 40. So with that, 99% of the commentators say, no, that's actually 4. So, but he says, hey, I said I'd take a vow in Hebron. That's where Absalom was born, was Hebron. And so he's going back home, and that's where, if you'll remember, that's where David initially reigned, which is kind of interesting because Absalom goes back to David's starting place and usurps him there first. Kind of a dirty move, isn't it? But he also has all the people that know him there and friends there. So he does that. And then down in verse 12, Absalom sends for Ahithophel. Now, Ahithophel was one of David's chief advisors, okay? He was a guy who, when he is described, it is a guy who the king listens to, because when he says something, he's like E.F. Hutton. Everybody listens. Everybody wants to know, well, what does Ahithophel say about that? Or when David has a question, hey, Ahithophel, come here, I can't figure this out. What do you say? And so he's a serious advisor. And with that, Absalom gets his number one advisor to defect. And that's a very important part of the story, because as we'll see, this actual passage and this psalm that we're going to look at is actually tied to 2 other psalms where David writes about Ahithophel. And so with that, you got to know that his one of his main guys was taken. But does anybody have a note on verse 7 as to what Absalom's name means? Does anybody know what that name means? Okay, good. I'll tell you. It means the peace of his father. The peace of his father.
P-E-A-C-E?
P-E-A-C-E. Now, does Absalom look like the peace of his father? Absolutely not. Okay, turn over to Psalm chapter 3. Psalm chapter 3. We're going to read that real quick. Actually, I think I will instead. I'm gonna read from Psalm 55 and 41 real quickly. I think that'll flow better. Absalom got Ahithophel to defect, and there are two Psalms where they believe that David was writing about Ahithophel because he was also someone who was very close to David in the throne and accompanied David a lot of places. So, um, in Psalm 41:9, it says this: Even my own familiar friend, whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. In that phrase, familiar friend, you know what that is? The man of peace. So you've got his son Absalom, who is his father's peace, and then you have this man Ahithophel, who is the man of peace. Now, isn't that ironic? That here are two that are supposed to be providing peace to David, and what do they do instead? They end up bringing absolute terror and horror and destruction to David. Okay? And so, with that, also, we see in Psalm 55, it says in verse 13, but it was you, a man my equal, my companion and my acquaintance. Speaking of a man who turned against David. And the commentators believe that both these passages are talking about Ahithophel. Because here was someone that was near to David's heart, supposed to be a man of peace, someone who helped him out, and yet he turned against him and went with Absalom. And so, with that, the son of peace and the man of peace turned against David. Okay? And so, what do you do? What do you do when those who should be on your side are not on your side? Where do you turn? Yes, great answer. God, yes. You turn to God. Because number one, who should be our first refuge? Yes. God should be our first response. And so David, in Psalm chapter 3, if you're still there, we're going to read that. David in Psalm chapter 3, we see it says, a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. So we know, direct reference, this is what it's talking about. Lord, how they have increased to trouble me. Many are they who rise up against me. Many are they who say of me, there's no help for him in God. Listen to that real quickly. God is no help to you. God's not going to help you. Have we ever heard that before? Is that fairly common to hear nowadays? Yeah. What does the world think God is or religion is? Yes. They say it's a crutch, don't they? There's no helping God. That's a crutch. It's stupid. You know? But they say that. Verse 3, it says, but you, O Lord, are a shield for me, my glory and the one who lifts up my head. I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he heard me from his holy hill, Selah. I lay down and I slept. I awoke, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me all around. Arise, O Lord, and save me, O my God. For you have struck all my enemies on the cheekbone. You have broken the teeth of the ungodly. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing is upon your people. So what does David do? He turns to God, doesn't he? And he says, you are my shield. And so with that, looking at it, we say, David has a part in this. He sinned, and as a result, Absalom and Ahithophel added to the trouble, didn't they? And so what do we do when we've got some fault, but yet others are making it even worse? Turn to God. And that's what David does. He says, you are a shield for me, the one who lifts up my head. And verse 5, if you want to underline it, star it, do whatever you want to do with it. This is the proof that's in the pudding, okay? This is where the rubber meets the road and where we see David's faith displayed. Why do I say that, you think? What do you think about verse 5 that shows that David's faith is real?
He laid down and slept. He laid there scared, anxious.
Yeah, exactly. David was able to lay down and sleep. Now, when we have problems, what's the number one thing that happens? What happens to people when they're in difficulty? What do you lose? Yeah. We lose sleep, don't we? Why?
Because we're troubled.
Okay, we're troubled. And so let's follow that trail. We're troubled. Why are we troubled?
You worry about it. It's on your mind all the time because you're not trusting God's got it handled.
There we go. You haven't really worked it out with God, have you? But what we see here is David, he's fleeing for his life. He should be really upset, shouldn't he? Especially knowing that, hey, part of this is my fault. It's my own son who's doing it. It's my best advisor who's doing it. So think about that. David has been betrayed by two very close people to him, two people he cares about. So when we get into a fight with someone who we care about, does our mind run? Do we review that videotape over and over and over and over again? Yeah, we do, don't we? Our mind can't get off it. We're like a dog worrying on a bone. But David says, he heard me from his holy hill. I lay down and slept. David was able to give his problem to God completely. I could end the lesson right there, couldn't I? If we learn to do that one thing alone, will it not benefit us greatly? But David is able to do that. And he says, I awoke, for the Lord sustained me. Not only was he able to sleep, but he recognized that God kept him alive all night long. And so he says, I awoke. So David says, I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me all around. In other words, if I'm surrounded by 10,000 people, I'm not worried about it. God's got it. Another example of David really having faith in God. And he finishes up and he says, save me. And then it's really interesting because he says, save me, oh my God, for you have struck my enemies on the cheekbone. Does anybody get the problem with that statement, that actual grammar? What's David saying?
It's past tense.
Yes, very good. It's past tense. He says, God saved me. You struck him on the jawbone. David says, save me. And he realizes right then, well, of course, God's going to save me. I'm his guy. He hasn't pulled his blessing from me. So he's got to do something, and he probably already has. And he says, you've struck them on the cheekbone. And he gets a little graphic with it, doesn't he? You've broken the teeth of the ungodly. He said, you gave them a right cross, and it's like the cartoons. Pling! All the teeth fall down on the ground. And David says, you've done it. And then he says, salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing is on your people. So David finishes up understanding that God's got this, doesn't he? And he is able to go. He still runs, doesn't he? He's going to be on the run for a while. But he knows that God is in control and God's got this. That's a hard lesson to learn, isn't it? It's hard when we're in the midst of the trouble to really lay that on God. But that's what we need to do. And when we do that, we get a lot of relief, don't we? But I want to show you something that's really, really neat about this. And that is this. Turn over to John 13:18. John 13:18. And as we turn there, what I want you to be thinking about is this. This was David's problem. He asked God to save him. And God does something that's amazing. Because God takes David's sin and Absalom's sin, and he turns it into something that he can use because of David's response. John 13:18 says, I do not speak concerning all of you. This is Jesus talking. I know who I am chosen, but that the scripture may be fulfilled, he who eats bread with me has lifted up his heel against me. This is Jesus talking about someone lifting up their heel against me. And that's how it's described in Psalm 41:9. He has lifted up his heel against me, referring to Ahithophel. So here's a situation created by David's sin, where he is betrayed by someone close to him, and God rescues him and makes that a part of the story of Jesus Christ. Do you get that? God takes David's sin, Absalom's sin, Ahithophel's sin, and he still takes it and transforms it into something good for his will, for his desire. Because with that, my own familiar friend, Shalomi, is my man of peace, the one who is supposed to help me. Jesus was referring to who? Judas, one of the 12, wasn't he? And he said, the one who's had bread with me is the one who's going to betray me. Another psalm, or in Psalm 55, David talks about the man who has been with me in the throng worshiping God. And what you see is a picture of Judas and Ahithophel that comes out. That this picture in David's life is a foreshadowing of what is going to happen to Jesus Christ in his life. And so with that, God takes this whole situation that we would say, what a mess. But David says, Lord, save me. And God says, okay, I can fix that. As a matter of fact, I will make it a part of Jesus Christ's story. So that's just one example. But then turn back to Jonah chapter 2 and verse 9. Jonah chapter 2 and verse 9. We're going to see something kind of fun with this as well. So, what I'm really saying with that as you're turning is this. You know what? We may have messed up, but when we give our broken pieces to God, what can he do with our broken pieces? Can he fix it and use it for his glory? Absolutely. Is anything too broke for God to fix? No. And so even though we mess up in our personal lives, with our friends, with our family, with whatever, can we do anything that's too far for God to fix? No. And so here we have a beautiful picture from David's life of God taking and doing that and actually making that a part of Jesus Christ's story. But it's not only there, it's also in Jonah chapter 2, verse 9. It says, but I will sacrifice to you with the voice of thanksgiving. I will pay what I have vowed. Salvation is of the Lord. Okay, pay attention to that last phrase. Salvation is of the Lord. Back in Psalm chapter 3, let me read verse 8. Salvation belongs to you, Lord. Okay? Psalm 3 was written several hundred years before Jonah happened. Jonah happened under Jeroboam II. Psalm 3 was written by David. So you have several hundred years that elapsed. Jonah quotes this verse from David. This is a direct quote that Jonah uses. So it's not only that God made it a part of the story of Jesus Christ, But also, one of the other prophets is going to quote that when he is sitting where? Where was Jonah at? He was in the belly of the whale. Who put Jonah there? Who put Jonah in the belly of the whale? Yeah, very good, Steve. Jonah did. Jonah's the one who said, no, I'm not going to do what God wants. Jonah's the one that said, okay, throw me overboard. Jonah puts himself in there because of his sin. He does it. And who does Jonah look to? He looks back to what happened to David because he knew what had happened. And he says, you know what? The only way I'm going to get out of this too is to turn to God, because salvation is of the Lord. Now, isn't that cool? We see two examples here of how God takes our mistakes, our sin, and when we give it to him and confess it and say, God, help me, I've made a mess, and how God takes and makes it into something beautiful. And so with that, what an encouragement to us that even if we blow it, God can fix it. And God can use our own sinfulness when it's turned over to him to make into something beautiful. And he can take those times when others are piling it on us. And we're like, God, help, help, help. I'm getting beaten up here. And he can use that for his glory as well. And so there's purpose in suffering, isn't there? Because God uses that suffering when we give it to him for his glory. And think about what people were thinking about when David is sound asleep and he's on the run. How is that guy sleeping? Think of Jesus when he was in the boat with the disciples and he's there sleeping and they're all going, Lord, we're dying. Why was Jesus able to sleep? He knew nothing bad was going to happen. God was in control. And so with that, we see how turning to God makes such a difference when we are in a difficult situation, whether it is of our own making or not, but how God can take even our most difficult times and turn them into something beautiful. So, any thoughts or comments on that? Yes.
We need to remember that beautiful isn't necessarily what we would consider beautiful. And I always think of how God thought the scent of burning animal flesh smelled good.
Mm-hmm.
We would think that stank, but to him that was beautiful because it was a sacrifice to him. So we need to remember that, even though if it doesn't turn out the way we think it should turn out, and it doesn't look good to us, we need to try to see it from God's point of view, because it's obviously good to him for some reason.
Yes. Yeah. Do you think that David, while he's fleeing from Absalom, thinks that, oh, the Messiah is going to go through this? No, he had no idea, did he? But yet, did God have an eternal viewpoint on that? Did God know that was going to happen? Yeah. And so you're exactly right. We need to have an eternal viewpoint, not a focus on now, but on God and what he can do. Yes.
Question. Because we're talking about giving it to God,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's partly our fault or whatever. People tend to want to keep control
Mm-hmm.
and handle things.
Yep.
So my question is that a good attribute? Do we get that from God as part of our characteristics, or why is that? Because it doesn't seem like we're able to handle most things without God.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that's a good question, is why do we want to control our situation? And that is a tendency of ours, isn't it? To want to control it. But we know that what we're supposed to be is what controlled? Spirit controlled, right. So in other words, we're supposed to yield to God in whatever situation we're in. and do what we know that he says to do. And so with that, we want to yank that control out of God's hands, don't we? And, I think of Balaam's donkey. Whipping the donkey. And yet the donkey is staring at the angel of the Lord who's going to kill him if that donkey moves forward. Are we whipping the donkey? Or are we saying, Lord, I don't know what's going on, but I'm giving it to you. You lead, you guide. I'm going to rely on you. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding.
So Satan really does want us to wrestle that control away from us.
Absolutely. Well, that's the first thing he did, wasn't it?
Yes,
He said, I want to be God. I want your throne.
there you go.
So, yes.
It's interesting when you think about it. David had the power to bring these two people out and execute. On his own power, he could have done that, but he gave it to God, and then he gets peace. And then he says, Lord, thank you for knocking the teeth out of my enemy.
Yes.
Something is a different response. I mean, often when I pray and I see the wickedness in the world, and I pray for the good people, and I pray that the Lord raise up our laws. But then it's those people that are wicked, that are doing evil, I say, Lord, cut them down, because they are not doing what you want, and they are not good.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the same idea of knocking the teeth out of those that really need them knocked out.
Yes.
Just interesting how they did that.
Well, and, our temptation is to pray a prayer of God's judgment, isn't it? If you look at Psalm 55, one of the things he prays is Lord, send them to hell alive. He literally does. That's what he says. Send them to hell alive. That's a tough prayer, isn't it? And yet that's what he prays. What's that?
The pastors they probably grapple with some of those verses and go,
Yeah, David's imprecatory psalms is what they call them. And David does ask for that. But what does God say we're supposed to do for our enemies?
Pray for them because he wants them to come to him.
Yep. And what specifically does he say we're supposed to do to our enemies and those who despitefully use us?
Forgive them.
Okay, forgive them. Yep. What else? Pray for them. Yep. And to bless them. God damn them to hell. Send them there. Hold on just a minute, my child. That's not really what I want. Why do you think God wants us to bless our enemies and to be kind and loving to them? It's a simple answer. This is not a trick question.
Because they'll be, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say because he would like them to be saved as well.
Exactly. There you go. Because God was kind to us. While we were yet enemies, he sent Jesus Christ to die for us. And so when we look at our enemies and say, God, they deserve hell, what are we saying?
Jesus' sacrifice was not good enough.
Yep.
We condemn ourselves.
Yes. And that's the other thing is, what we're really saying is, if they deserve hell, who else deserves hell?
We do.
I do. Ouch. How many of us would say, God, send me to hell, I deserve it? We do now, yeah. Well, we know we do. Honestly, we're sinners. And for that sin, there has to be a price. And so with that,
He paid, not us.
Christ paid in our place what we couldn't pay. And so now we can say that, but would we have said that before we're saved? No. We would have said, I'm better than you. You should go to hell. So, yeah, these are some of the things that are tough. They're tough things to discuss. But with that, what we need to see is that God loves us We were enemies of God at one point. And so therefore, we should treat our enemies like God treated us because we were his enemy at one point. What does Paul say? As such, some of us were murderers, adulterers, thieves, So with that, I think the two things that I would have you look at tonight is what God can do even with our mistakes when we give them to him, and how we can have peace and stability in the midst of the storm, knowing that God can use it for his glory. And the other thing is that God takes these things that we give to him and he makes something of value out of them. It's kind of like someone smashes a window and then a master glassmith comes along and makes some stained glass windows out of it that are beautiful. That's what God can do. And that's what he does. And he's amazing in that. And he does that because of his love for us. So that's all I've got to say about that, unless anybody else has any other comments or thoughts. Okay. Well, in that case, let us take some time to go to prayer. And Jack Fulton came through his surgery very, very well. He is at home recovering. And so that is an answer to prayer. Craig Hauser was here today. I did not see him, but he was walking around church. So that's an answer to prayer. We're thankful for that. Anita Williamson had cataract surgery today. I don't know how that came out. So we need to be in prayer for her as she recovers. Any other prayer requests? And Todd, we can probably cut the live feed now because otherwise it'll be a bunch of mumbling.